There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst. We're looking at the theme of generous, and we're going to discover who God is. He is generous, he is good, he is full of grace, he is giving. And as we are worshiping, loving, following that kind of God, we begin to discover that connecting with him, we start to become those kinds of people, knowing God and becoming like him. Well, good morning, Living Word. How you guys doing? Hey, thanks for being here as we are in week number 2 of Generous. Very simply, here's the theme. God is generous, God gives, God is good, God is gracious. It's who he is, it's what he does. And for those who follow that kind of God, that's who we become, and that is what we wind up doing. Hey, we had a great response last week as we talked about generosity, because really at the core, everybody wants to be a generous person. We like to be more generous. Sometimes we just feel we are unable to, and we don't have a plan to become more generous. But we long to be generous. And if you're visiting this week, I'm glad that you're here. We've had 1 or 2 weeks where we're just talking about money, about finances. We need to do that from time to time. And so if you're here visiting, glad that you're here. I hope these words about generosity will so fill you that wherever you wind up making your way through the world in the next weeks or months, wherever your situations are, your contexts are, man, I hope you become as generous a person as possible, because when you do, you'll be such a blessing to so many people, because that's exactly what happens with generous people. My mom died back in April, and it was a little bit unexpected, sudden, and it was just actually a beautiful time of us all encountering God's grace. But one of the things that we found afterwards is we started going through Mom's stuff, and Mom had stuff. And by the way, for any of you who are getting up there in years a little bit and you have a lot of stuff, do your kids a favor and start getting rid of your stuff. The Tithing Salvation Army, Life Path, lots of different places will love to have your stuff. But anyway, I digress a bit. But one of the things we found out how generous my mom was. Now, by the way, we always knew Mom was generous. Part of it was her passion. She was a nurse. She cared for people. She loved to help people. But even outside her vocation, she just liked to help people. She was always serving at her church. When she retired, she wound up getting involved in so many different organizations, doing so many different things, helping out with so many needs. We knew she gave money away, and when we were going through her records, it was striking how much she gave to her church, how different organizations right here in New York she really loved. She loved to give to them, and their organizations in just the United States. I mean, Mom was just a generous person. And then also in her will, she had asked us if we would take, a part of her estate and give that to some of these organizations that she cared about. She wanted to keep on blessing them after she was gone. And I tell you, that really moved me, just seeing how generous Mom was. Well, Becky and I were going through the process about the same time. Say, wow, our will's out of date. If your will's out of date, by the way, please keep that in mind. But a couple of things were out of date. We thought, we better get some stuff up to date. And so as we talked to the lawyer, one of the things Becca and I decided to do is we said, wow, just like Mom was generous, we'd like to be generous to the church as well. And so we decided we're not going to give a penny to Matthew, we're giving it all to the church. No, we're not going to do that. But I tell you, Mom's generosity did get us thinking about different ways that we can bless the church. And see, that's what generous people do. They motivate us. They bless us. They encourage us. They're just these shining lights. I pray that every one of you will become this generous person that really makes a difference, a shining difference in the lives of many people. Well, today what I want to do is I'm going to talk about a concept called stewardship. It is very central to the scriptures, very close to my heart and Becky's heart. Stewardship is a way that helps many of us become generous people. Now, we're going to get to Matthew chapter 25, where Jesus gives some of the most beautiful words on stewardship that there are. But stewardship, it starts way, way long before Jesus. And in fact, you can go back to Genesis chapter 1, and we see stewardship begins right then and there, because God is a creator God. He builds, he designs, he works, he acts, he activates, he advances into existence the things that he cares about. And then you and I have been created by God in his image, and so that means we are also created to be creators, builders, designers, workers, those who act, those who activate, those who advance things into existence. And what God does is he invites you and I into partnership. What a great word. What a lofty idea that you and I are invited to be in partnership with God as we are taking care of his business in the world. Now, I'm at that age where the 1970s rock and roll, that was my music era. I know that's really old, but man, that was the best music ever back in the 1970s. And one of those bands was called Bachman Turner Overdrive. Does anybody remember that band, Bachman Turner? Yeah, okay. Yeah, give yourself an applause. You guys deserve it. You're awesome, these old rockers. But one of their songs was taking care of business every day, taking care of business every way. Remember that? Well, that's kind of what stewardship is all about. You and I taking care of God's business every day, taking care of God's business in every way that we can imagine. That's what God invited Adam and Eve to do, take care of his business every day and in every way. And he got them started right away by naming the animals. God created the animals, but he left some unfinished business. He said, Adam and Eve, now you guys go ahead and name the animals. Have the joy of advancing the good stuff that I've started. And this thing called stewardship was off and running. Now, our culture gives us some great stories of stewardship. Many of you guys have seen the movie Shawshank Redemption. I hope you've seen that. If you haven't, you ought to. In fact, I would really encourage you all to go out and watch that sometime in the next week or two. It is one of those powerful stories of stewardship. So there's a couple of main characters. The one guy on the right, his name is Andy, and the guy on the left is playing a character named Red. And they're both in prison. And Andy, played by Tim Robbins, was a financial banker kind of guy. He was wrongly accused of killing his wife, but he was thrown into prison even though he's not guilty. And there he's going to be for life. He's a lifer, and so is Red. But as Andy is there, he begins to see that things are not the way they should be in the prison, and prisoners are not being taken care of the way they should be, and there's not as much hope as there should be. There's not as much purpose as there should be. And what Andy begins to do, and you see it in story after story as the movie goes on, is he is doing whatever he can to steward, take care of, to nurture, to guard, to protect, to bring dignity, to bring growth to everybody that he can. It's like it becomes his mission to improve life in the prison. That's exactly what he does as the years and the decades go by. And Red becomes one of the core guys helping him. They become the stewards of all the people that are there in prison. Which, by the way, the character who is Warden Norton, he should have been a steward, but he's not a steward. He doesn't care for the prisoners. He uses them. He abuses them. He doesn't do things to help them. He's not concerned about their well-being. He's not concerned about them getting some kind of help or growth. And so the stuff that he should have done, he doesn't do. So we need Andy and Red to do what he should have done. It's a beautiful story. Please go and watch it. Now, by the way, there's one or two graphic scenes. So you just want to be ready for that. Then there's this little story of no importance at all, The Lord of the Rings. And in this little story, there's a land called Gondor, and Gondor is the great nation of men, and Gondor is this sort of in-between land from Mordor, which is the land of hideous evil, and all of the rest of Middle-earth. And here is Gondor. They are sort of a buttress fortress nation in between, and they had been ruled by a king, but there's been no king in Gondor for long, long centuries. And in the absence of the king, Gondor has been led by people who are called stewards. And they steward in Tolkien's story as somebody who has been entrusted with the welfare of Gondor, its land, its people, its future. And as the centuries have gone on, in the absence of the king, the rightful king, the stewards have been responsible to take care of what belongs to the king. And now the return of the king is imminent, and the current steward, Denethor, is a bad steward. He's not doing a good job taking care of the city. He's not doing a good job to resist this hideous evil called Mordor. He is failing as a steward, but fortunately, as he is failing as a steward, the return of King Aragorn is at hand. And so that's the name of the third novel, The Return of the King. Yeah, go watch the movie if you don't want to read a 1,000-page book. Stewardship. Jesus talks about stewardship, takes it to new levels in Matthew 25. Let me read a few verses for you, not the whole part. And by the way, I'm going to read this, going to tell you just a couple of ideas, but I think I'm only going to talk about 3 ideas. And there's almost a dozen good ideas on stewardship. If you want to pick up one of the message resources, you can pick one up on your way out. We map out all those 11 or 12 ideas. It'd be really worth your while to sit down and get even more inspired by what Jesus has to say. Here's a couple quick words. So Jesus saying in Matthew 25, about the stewardship, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and here's a core phrase, entrusted his wealth to them. Now, to one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then the master went on his journey. Now, the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work, and he gained 5 more bags. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But then there was a man who had received 1 bag. He went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Didn't do anything with it other than hide it in the ground. Well, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, you have entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See what I've done with it? I've got you 5 more back. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'm going to put you in charge of a whole lot of my stuff. Hey, come in and share your master's happiness. And then the story goes on, and there's a similar thing about the 2 bags individual, and then the person who had the 1 bag and wasn't very faithful. His story is a little darker. But let me just stop with those couple of verses and pull out a couple of ideas that are really central to this teaching that Jesus is giving about stewardship. So here's the first idea. It was a simply radical, revolutionary worldview idea that nothing you have belongs to you. It all belongs to God. This world and all that contains belong to God. You belong to God. Everything belongs to God. Nothing belongs to you. It was a revolutionary idea. It did not exist in any other culture. You know, in every other culture, it's like if it was yours, you owned it, you possessed it, do whatever you could to keep it, fight to keep it, guard it, because there's other people who want to take away what belongs to you. Don't let them do that. Not so with the Jewish people. The Jews understood that God is the one who owns all things, and he just simply gives to his people things that belong to God. Hey, there are 2 ways that they got really radical about this. They were the first culture where they did not believe that parents owned their children. Now, up to that point in human history, every culture believed that parents literally owned the kids. A lot of times, those cultures believed that the wife was owned by the husband as well, but right now, I'm just talking about the kids. Parents owned their kids, and so therefore, they could do whatever they wanted to with their kids. Well, the Jews came along, and God said, no, you don't own your kids. Your kids are mine. Now, they're on loan to you, but they really belong to me. And it changed, it revolutionized how people began to take care of the children. The Jews were brand new in the things that they did for their kids. Here's another idea that was really radical back in those days, that even the supreme ruler of the Jewish people, the people did not belong to the king. The nation of Israel did not belong to the king of Israel. The people, the resources, the wealth, the land, none of it was owned by the king. It belonged to God, who gave generously to so many people. The king was therefore instructed to be a shepherd. And by the way, shepherds take care of the flock. They nurture, they protect, they guard. And to the best of my knowledge, there was no other ancient supreme ruler that had the label shepherd king. The Jews were onto something really new with this. Their kings are meant to be servants of the people, not bossing and lording over them. And then the kings are also told to be stewards, because king, you don't own the people, they belong to God, and they are on loan to you. Radical kind of stuff, radical kind of things. Which leads to the second point about stewardship, which Jesus is getting at, that it all belongs to God, it doesn't belong to you, but God entrusts to you what belongs to him. Now, that word entrust is a very significant word. I mean, he gives us stuff, but it's still his. It's like he loans us things that belong to him, but the word entrust implies there is a sacred responsibility. There is a weightiness that goes with you and I being entrusted with something. So moms and dads, if you have kids who are school age, let me give you an example. Every day you send your kids off to school, and in essence, you are entrusting your children for that day into the hands of the school system. You are entrusting your children's education and your children's future and your children's capacity to be able to be a contributing person. You are entrusting all of that developmental stuff into the hands of those who are in the school system, the teachers and the office workers and the whole system. You entrust your kids into the school system, and you hope at the end of the day you get your kids back. Now, maybe some of you don't hope you get your kids back, but in the most cases we entrust them and we expect to get our kids back. That idea about entrusting works all throughout our culture. And let me just talk about Living Word for a moment. So back, last summer when you guys, in prayer and discernment, you extended an invitation for me to become the next lead pastor. What you did at that point is you were entrusting this church and its welfare into my hands. Now, by the way, not just my hands, there's a whole team of people. Our board, our elders, our deacons, our staff, we've all been entrusted, but in some pretty significant way, you were entrusting the leadership of the vision and the mission and the culture and the values and the plans and the dreams and the future. You were entrusting that into my hands. But listen, it doesn't belong to me. I don't own it. I don't possess it. I am only here to do something as beautiful and good as possible. It belongs to you. It belongs to God. And I've just been entrusted with certain responsibilities. And every year when we select new deacons, every so often when we appoint new elders, and every now and then when we have a new hire on staff, all those people, each one of them, they are being entrusted with the responsibility to take wise care, not only what we have, but to grow it and make it as good as we can. That's just what stewards do. It's the nature of stewardship. It all belongs to God. It does not belong to us. God entrusts what belongs to him into our care. And remember this. This is the third point from Matthew 25. What belongs to God and as entrusted to you and I, it is precious to God. And it needs to be precious to you and I. It's not like God looks at you and says, hey, let me give you some of my stuff, and then, boy, glad I could get rid of that. Glad I could unload that onto somebody else's plate. No, that's not how God thinks. Anything that God gives to you is so valuable to him. It matters to God. And he gives it to you because it matters so much to him. And he gives it to you so you can do something powerful and beautiful and lasting with what matters to God. So therefore, it must matter to you and I. And all has God given us so much. I just want to go real broad for a moment, then I'm going to come back and focus on this thing called our financial resources. But, and Ryan even mentioned it this morning, but look at all the stuff that God has entrusted into our care. As Ryan said, he's actually entrusted your very life, your very physicality. He's entrusted your body. He's entrusted your health. He's entrusted your mind, your intellect, your learning. He's entrusted you with skills and capacities and competencies. And he wants you to take care of all that, but he wants you to grow everything that he has given to you. He's entrusted people into your care, your family, your neighbors, your friends, people in your small group. He's entrusted so many things into your care. And by the way, if you're a leader, I'd like to just make a little special comment here. But one of my understandings of leadership, and I think it is very, very biblical, is as some of us are able to move up in positions of authority, responsibility, we have a even higher responsibility to take care of larger number of resources, larger numbers of people, and we have to be exceedingly concerned for their welfare, their well-being, and their growth. It's just what stewards who are leaders have to do. Whether you manage, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you own your business, whether you are leading a big business that is owned by stakeholders, shareholders, it's just what leaders wind up doing. And man, if we can recapture this concept of stewardship all around their culture, I think our nation is going to become an increasingly awesome place to be. Now let me come back to narrow down though where we're heading. So here's what stewards understand. They understand a couple of words that are very important in the Bible. One of those words is tithing, one of the words is offerings, and another word is generosity. Real quick. So the word tithe appears in the Bible many times, and when it is first introduced, literally the word means 10%. Now, when it was introduced, the nation of Israel was an agrarian culture. They had some trade going on. They had some merchants. They had some tradesmen. But for the most part, people worked with their hand really close to the earth, and they had all this produce and product and stuff that was there. They hardly, the concept of money hardly existed back then. They didn't have too much of that, but they had stuff. And so what God says, what I want you to do is all the stuff that you have, that by the way, is mine, which I've given to you, I want you to take 10%, and I want you to set that aside for the spiritual well-being of the land, because there's a bunch of folks, and I'm going to give special responsibility to take care of all the religious ceremonies, the observances, the feasts, the liturgies, the celebration, the sacrifices, the entire spiritual welfare of the nation. There's a group of people, and they're not going to have time to farm, they're not going to have time to be tradesmen, they're not going to have time to do all that stuff, so you have to take care of them, and I'm going to provide all you need to do that. And it was called the tithe. And ever since then, basically in human history, God's people have had that particular model of supporting the spiritual formation work that God wants to do in a community. And that's exactly what we wind up doing today. Your tithes wind up helping support what's going on. It's a really important concept. We sometimes think it just no longer matters. Well, it does. God's never said the tithe doesn't matter. It does. But here's the second word, offering. So in addition to tithes, all throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, we read that from time to time we take offerings. Well, what are offerings for? Usually it's one of two things. Number one is when something significant has to be built and it just is going to require more resources. And we looked at two of those last week when we saw the portable tabernacle that was moving through the wilderness with God's people in Exodus chapter 35. And God said, well, take an offering so we can build something beautiful. And the people came and they gave so much money. They said, stop. No more money is needed. We've got all that we need for this particular project. And then in 1 Chronicles 29, we saw it happen again when they were done with the portable tabernacle. They're going to build a magnificent temple for the glory of God to dwell and for the religious life of the Jewish nation to be advanced so all the world would be blessed. The people took an offering and it was an amazing amount of resources that were made available for building this new thing. And one other time we see in the book of Nehemiah, when now lots of centuries have gone by, lots of hard things have happened, but they're rebuilding the city and the people are bringing offerings for the rebuilding of the city of God. So sometimes offerings have to do with these building projects that are unusual. And by the way, we've been taking offerings for our building project. We don't do that very often in our history, but every now and then you do that. Here's though where offerings are talked about all the time in the Bible, and it's offerings to help people who are hurting and struggling. And so what's going to come up in about a month or so, 6 weeks, is we're going to be taking our Christmas Eve offering. And wow, is that ever as rooted in the Bible as you can think? And every single dollar, every single dime that comes in is going to wind up going out to people who are in need, people who can't get by. There's folks that are just at these disadvantaged places in life. And there's wonderful organizations all around their city and some organizations around the world that they are doing powerful things for people who are in great need. We're going to get a chance to bless those organizations and those people. That's exactly what the Bible means when I say, hey, God's people, take offerings to bless the world. We're going to have a chance to do that once again. We love to do that. Well, stewards are, they just understand that they've got to manage resources of tithes and offerings. And then when they do, this thing called generosity begins to emerge. They are managing their finances in such a way that they are able to make a real difference. I've had people come up and tell me stories from last week. I had another half dozen stories this week of people telling me stories about how God has worked with them about tithes and offerings. But here's a story I heard last week. It's really, really pretty powerful. So this woman's talking to me, and she tells me that her and her husband, they graduated from college, a number of years back, and they had about $100,000 of debt from college. Now, not exactly a nice way to start your post-college career, but unfortunately it's happening more often than not. Being just recent grads, they moved into not necessarily high-paying entry-level jobs where they really didn't have a lot of income coming in. And so what did they do? But promptly went ahead about the American dream where they were buying stuff they couldn't afford with money they didn't have to have debt that they would never be able to pay off. And they started doing that, maxing out credit cards and another credit card and buying stuff that they wanted but they didn't need, buying stuff that they wanted but couldn't afford. And before long, they are realizing that they are getting to this financial place of crisis. It came to the point where they could no longer pay the rent on their apartment. Now, at that point, as everything is bottoming out for them, and by the way, they weren't giving, they weren't doing anything with tithes and offerings, they had no generosity going on in their lives, they were just overspending on themselves. They wound up talking with people in their small group, and they got some love, some encouragement, and some direction. And they wound up moving into Financial Peace University. And that's one of the programs we offer. It's not our program. It's a national program. But wow, has it ever helped people? They got in that program. They had a table facilitator who gave them a lot of tough love, a lot of accountability. They began to make some radical changes. They came up with a plan. They knew they needed a plan. So here's the plan. Reduce our spending radically, start finding new sources of income, and start doing business God's way. Let's start being generous to God's purposes. They started doing all three of those things. They ruthlessly cut spending out of their budget. Most of the stuff they were buying they didn't need. Once they stopped buying stuff they didn't need, they started having some extra money to start paying down the debt on the stuff that they had paid for before. They wound up choosing to start tithing, and I tell you, that was a huge step for them because they weren't in a very good financial situation, but they really believed that they should be honoring God with their finances, so they started tithing. They went out and got some more income, and they just put that plan into practice over and over and over. And as time started going by, they started getting some financial sanity in their lifestyle. They started getting their finances in order, and from that point, 4 years later, now we have to fast forward 4 years later, they have no credit card debt. They are paying down those college loans pretty strong. They wound up buying a house because it was cheaper to pay rent and utilities than it was to have the rent. Then they wound up refinancing their house, so they had only a 15-year mortgage. They are tithing. They don't buy anything on credit anymore. They just buy it with cash. And one of them is going back to graduate school, and they are doing that on cash. They have moved into a whole new place of financial freedom. Their anxieties about money are gone, and they have become so generous. They tithe, they give offerings, and there are other organizations out there they just love to give money to. What a success story in 4 years of hard work. And they have become really generous people who just have the joy of being good stewards of what God has entrusted to them. That's what stewardship is all about. Getting a proactive plan to get our finances in order so we are really managing well what God has given to us, so we can be generous the way God wants. So if you guys wouldn't mind, let me just have you pull out the little card in here. And by the way, we will be offering another Financial Peace University. I believe it will be starting in January. It's a chance it might not be till February, but we will be offering another one. And if your finances need to get in order, I promise you, it's about an 8 or 9 week program. It will revolutionize your life. It'll set you free. However, we also know that people need a plan to start becoming generous people. So what we've done is we borrowed an idea from a lot of churches. They call it the Tithing Challenge. And here's where a couple people came up to me afterwards. Hey, Pastor Brian, sometime back I took the Tithing Challenge. I just started giving 10% to the Lord, and it's just amazing what God has done. Some of you might just want to take that really big step of faith, and even though right now you can't see how you're going to do it, just say, hey, God, if this is what you want me to do, I'm going to start doing this, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to start getting my finances in order. Really encourage you to think about that, but now let me just get practical. I know a lot of you just can't imagine how you're going to be able to do that. And so then if you don't have another plan, then you don't do anything. So if you turn the card over, on the back, we have another plan that almost all of us can do, and it's called the Generosity Journey. Here's how it works. You take a look at your current level of generosity. And I'm just going to pull out a number, and you could put any number in you want. But let's say right now you're giving $10 a week. And you say, that's a great start, but I want to do more. And so what I'm going to do is and you pick an amount. In this case, let's say you pick $5. And so now my new generosity amount is going to be $15 a week. And I'm going to start doing that until I'm slowly getting some things in order. And then there's going to come a point, maybe a month from now, maybe 2 months from now, I'm going to add another $5. I'm going to take another step on the generosity journey. If you wind up doing that, just think, but in a couple of months, you could be twice as generous as you currently are. And forward that for a whole year, you can move to generosity levels that today think, how in the world can I be that generous? And a year from now, say, wow, it's actually not that hard to be that generous. Now, let me tie all this together. Oh, and by the way, there's a little tear-off thing here. We don't want you guys to do this today, but as you're thinking that through and you think you would like to do that, just let us know what you're doing. We don't want your name. We just would like to find out if, how God is working in your life. Just, let us know sometime over the next week or two. I'm going to pay you guys a really big compliment. You are all so darn ordinary. Yeah, I mean that. That's a compliment. Big compliment. There are very few of you here this morning that you are an extraordinary person. Very few of you. Now, there are probably a couple, but very few. Most of us are just ordinary. And there's very few of you who you will do extraordinary things. A couple of you will. Most of us are just really ordinary folks who are called to do a lot of ordinary things and to do those ordinary things with great love and great faithfulness. And as you and I together are doing those ordinary things with great love, with great faithfulness and generosity, well, then something else begins to happen. After worship, I'm going to come back up and I'm just going to tell you a final word from Jesus. I'm going to tell you what happens when ordinary people do ordinary things with love, faithfulness, and generosity.
This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, Let me never forget that though the wrong seems often so strong, God is the ruler, yeah. And this is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King, let heaven ring. God reigns, let earth be glad. This is my Father's world. The battle is not done. Jesus who died shall be satisfied, and earth and heaven be one. Jesus who died shall be satisfied, and earth and heaven be one.
In John chapter 14, Jesus, he's almost done his work on earth. His mission is drawing to a close, and he's telling his closest disciples, you will do greater things than what I have done. Can you imagine how incredulous the disciples were when they heard Jesus say that? Because they'd seen what Jesus had done, and that was pretty extraordinary. Jesus says, you guys are going to do even greater stuff. How is that possible? Well, Jesus knew that before long there'd be hundreds of those disciples. And sometime after that, there'd be thousands. And one day soon, there'd be tens of thousands and millions. So just imagine this, as millions of followers of Jesus come together and worship all across this planet, the things that we do become extraordinary. 20 years ago, there were about 800 ordinary people built this building. God did something extraordinary through 800 ordinary people. And the mission of God has just grown beautifully here. So here we are, 2017, about 20 years later. There's over 2,000 ordinary people here. Can you guys imagine what we can do together, what God can do through all of us together to bless this community and maybe even bless the world? Something extraordinary. So Lord, here we are, your ordinary friends. And we are here to live today and tomorrow with great love, with great faithfulness, and with great generosity. So Lord, just help us come together with these things, with these capacities, with these prayers, with these desires, that we might see you do something beautiful and lasting and powerful, and always for your greater glory through us, your people. So Lord, thanks for today. Give us an awesome week. And everybody said, amen. Have a great week.